Before I start this video, let's get something out of the way right now. There are 3 things you will not hear me discuss on this channel. 1. Political agendas. 2. Hot topic. And 3. Celebrity deaths. These are all controversial matters in and of themselves, and they have no place on my channel. Previously on Cinematographic Movie Reviews. Vulture isn't a damn smurf. Do something, motherfucker! And don't tell me it's because Tony Stark signed the Sokovia Accords, because I call bullshit on that being a factor in anything. Fuck the Sokovia Accords. The only reason the Peter and Tony relationship even exists in this movie is because of that stupid Civil War comic. I also really dislike Ned Leeds. He's loud, rude, narcissistic, unfunny, unsympathetic, and unnecessary to whatever plot this movie is going for. Dear Sony and/or Disney Mark, nobody gives a fuck about Harry Osborn. The Goblin
is dead. Bury it.
This unnecessary and completely out of nowhere surprise motherfucker moment the movie goes for loses any and all shock and awe it might have gained if it wasn't busy shoving the Peter and Tony relationship in my face and dicking me around with Breakfast Club references. And while we're on the subject of surprise motherfucker moments, Michelle's friends call her MJ. That sounds like a very specific habit for Michelle to just now bring up. As a character, Peter doesn't carry any indication that he likes helping people because it sets a positive example or even because it's a good thing. The few people he does manage to save are just people he knows. The deli manager in Queens, that busted-ass Mike Wazowski wannabe motherfucker. The Eric Cartman wannabe motherfucker. Why is Kylo trying to convince Rey that he can teach her the ways of the dark side? You just spent the last 3 days trying to kill her over a fucking map. Do you even Jedi? Last year, I reviewed the long-awaited Marvel movie, Spider-Man Homecoming, and there are a lot of things about that movie that I didn't mention. If any of you have seen my review of that movie, it probably sounds like I've only seen the movie once, and that's primarily because, well, I've only seen the movie once. Usually I'd need to give a movie more than a second viewing before I can write a review on it. For example, I've seen Star Wars The Force Awakens and Independence Day Resurgence twice, if not 3 times. And while Independence Day Resurgence is technically my first review for this channel, it's not the first video I worked on, not by a long shot. And no, I haven't seen Rogue One yet. The closest I've come to watching Rogue One is in the Everything Wrong with video for it on CinemaSins and Pawn Story Games' 2-hour video of it. And as visually interesting as The Last Jedi looks, the more I keep hearing about it, the less enthusiastic I am about seeing it. Part of the trouble that I've been having with Spider-Man Homecoming lately is working up the nerve to sit through it again, much less having any interest in doing so, because my feelings about the movie and my overall rating of it are based on the last experience I had with it. And I'd be lying if I were to say it were a pleasant one. I could almost say that about Avengers Infinity War, and I still can't decide which of those movies irritates me the most. I should also mention before I go any further that I went into this movie with very low expectations, partly because it had been a while since I had seen a Spider-Man movie that I really liked, and partly because I just didn't care for what I saw in the trailers. In fact, for the longest time, I wasn't even going to see Spider-Man Homecoming, because I just didn't care to see a Spider-Man movie where Peter Parker is relegated to a sidekick, which sorta happens anyway, but not for the reasons you'd expect. I still don't. It didn't help that I was in a really bad mood when I saw it, for reasons I will not discuss on this channel, mainly because they involve a political matter that has no business being political. So I walked into this movie not liking it in the first place, and walked out not only wishing that I'd stuck to my guns, but wanting to strangle the life out of every single character in the movie, with the possible exception of Zendaya Coleman's character, Michelle. But that's because Michelle was the only character in the movie who didn't piss me off. And naturally, she doesn't have a whole lot of screen time. More on that later. The most important thing to keep in mind about Spider-Man Homecoming is that it only exists because of an agenda, regardless of whether or not that agenda makes any sense. And as Steve Rogers said in Captain America Civil War, agendas always change. There are several things about this movie that rub me the wrong way and annoy me to no end. The really juvenile high school setting, its condescending attitude towards its own story, its tone-deaf humor, its race bending for the sake of race bending, The fact that this movie seems to have the same problems as the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, particularly in its constant flanderization of an otherwise bland and uninteresting love interest, the way it shamelessly reskins Ivan Vanko/Whiplash as Adrian Toomes, hoping that I won't notice, and of course, the artificial way it uses Tony Stark as a father figure for Peter Parker, and the fact that it throws Ben Parker under the bus. He's less of a father figure and more of a would-be job coach who keeps talking past a 16-year-old kid. No, Stark, I don't care if you're the one doing the talking. He's 16. Look, I agree that this Peter Parker is an inexperienced, irresponsible prick, but you're the one who drafted him for your dumbass Capture the Winter Soldier mission, which amounted to jack shit. If you can't trust the little with your tech, then you shouldn't have trusted him to go with you to Germany. Something I didn't really mention, as brought up by one of my commenters, is that Peter doesn't really face any consequences for his actions, which, I'm not gonna lie, kinda confuses me, because it feels only half true. Oh, there are consequences. The problem is that A, they don't mean anything, and B, everything that happens in this movie is just an excuse for a joke at Peter Parker's expense, just like the Raimi films. And that's the problem with trying to talk about this movie as a Spider-Man movie. This movie is not about the consequences of being Spider-Man. Spider-Man in this movie is basically just a video game character with cheat codes. This movie doesn't want me to root for Spider-Man any more than the Raimi films do. It wants me to laugh my ass off when Peter Parker gets his ass handed to him, either by the Vulture or by Iron Man, neither of whom are particularly interesting in this movie. The former is basically just Defoe Goblin, Whiplash, and Aldrich Killian wrapped into one, and the latter having officially lost everything that motivated him to become Iron Man in the first place. Forget whether or not you think Iron Man makes more sense as a father figure for Peter than Ben Parker. The main reason I don't care for the Peter and Tony relationship in the way that a movie wants me to, and the reason it's hard for me to feel bad for Peter or Tony, is that Tony Stark never takes the time to communicate with Peter, and I never get the sense that he has any intention of doing so. Tony also tells Peter that he's not ready to be an Avenger, that he needs more experience. Yet everything that Tony says and does in this movie is either a contradiction of or a hindrance to Peter's development. He does this twice, and it's really ridiculous. Once after Peter bounces from the party and catches not Tom Hardy with his pants down, and then later when Peter is on the ferry and doesn't realize he stumbled into a federal operation. This dumbass teenager spends the majority of the film trying to impress Stark when he has no reason to, and when he tries to prove himself, Stark decides to bench him, especially when stuff related to the Vulture goes down in Queens, you know, where Peter and his aunt live. That's his neighborhood, you jackass! The little fucker just can't seem to catch a break with this dickhead. He either gets benched by Tony for not having any experience, or he gets benched by Tony for trying too hard to get some experience. Not to mention, Stark, that you should probably make sure that your so-called protege doesn't have to risk getting himself killed. Alex Murphy ain't got nothing on me waiting for Tony and Peter to get a damn grip. This movie can't decide whether it wants me to side with Tony and have Peter benched, except he's letting himself be stolen from by a crazy person who is still a crazy person, even after the revelation that Liz Allen is his daughter, or if it wants me to side with Peter and have him run the risk of getting himself killed. But even if it did, I'm sticking to my guns on this. Why the hell would you give a 16-year-old kid a tech suit with an instant kill feature? That's like giving a kindergartner a loaded shotgun with C4 bullets. Not only is it really dangerous, but it's also, everybody say it with me now, a stupid-ass decision. Don't get me wrong, Peter is still a moron in this movie, but that does not mean that Tony is off the f***ing hook. Get your shit together, Iron Man. And to quote one of my favorite Canadian critics, Cinema Simpleton, Spider-Man should be making jokes, not allow himself to become one. Regarding my issues with Michelle Jones, let's set aside the fact that Michelle's reveal makes no sense, because you'd think that Michelle being nicknamed MJ would be common knowledge at this dumbass school. In fact, for someone who's supposed to be the token goth chick, it makes about as much sense as Galen Erso being the reason the Death Star has a weakness, or being a reverse John Harrison and nobody knowing about it until the last minute. Or, now that I'm thinking about it, Flashpoint, all 2.5 of them. You see, a reverse John Harrison would be if Khan's birth name was John Harrison. Mostly what I'm getting at is that the MJ reveal is unnecessary. But here's the thing that pisses me off the most about Michelle. I wouldn't have a problem with her as a potential love interest for Peter, if this movie were to build towards it. Considering that Tom Holland and Zendaya Coleman get along just fine in real life, you could easily play on that in a way that fixes the relationship issues of the Raimi films, while also improving on the foundation for relationships in The Amazing Spider-Man. Number one, you can start by having more of Peter and Michelle in the movie, and less of Ned and Liz. Matter of fact, you can very much cut Ned and Liz from the script, just have Peter and Michelle be best friends from the outset. Nice to have a superhero and a potential love interest who actually know each other, and yes, I realize Batman Begins did the same thing first. Give them friendly banter with each other, and just don't reference Harry Osborn ever again. Number two, give Michelle a hobby. Tell me what kind of sport she's into. What does she like to do after school? If it has to be a high school setting, have a subplot where Flash Thompson, the real Flash Thompson, not this Big Bang Theory looking motherfucker, is on the high school basketball team, but his grades start slipping. Peter finds out about it and decides to tutor him. Flash could be like, you're alright, Parker, for a book smart. And Peter could be like, gee, thanks, Flash, I think. And that gives Michelle reasons to fall for him later, because even though Peter and Flash don't get along with each other, Peter is still willing to help a student in need. It might even be a turn-on for her. Subtlety. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. And to all my brothers and sisters out there, happy Memorial Day.